So as I look at my header here in my Photoshop wireframe, my header stretches across the whole width of the window, and my intention is that if someone's browser window is actually wider than this, that the background color of my header and footer will actually extend to the edges of the browser window. In other words, my header and my footer will be full width, but the contents of the header and footer in this design will be confined to this area. So let me show you the dimensions of my header. I'm going to turn on my rulers in Photoshop. Now, when you turn on your rulers, if they show up in inches, you can quickly convert them to pixels by just right-clicking on the ruler and choosing pixels instead of inches. So I designed my wireframe at 1200 pixels wide, but in reality the browser window could be wider than this. But I've designed all my contents of my header, my section, and my footer to be confined within 1000 pixels. So as you can see, my contents start at about 100 pixels and they end at 1100. So the contents of my header are confined to a box that is about 1000 pixels wide, but my header itself is full width. Inside my header I have the logo, the website title, and the menu. So over the next few videos I will show you how to build out this header piece by piece. I will start with the logo. So this logo is a graphic with a transparent background. It's on this layer. So if your logo is also a graphic on a single layer with a transparent background, you can quickly and easily extract it out to a PNG image. Since there is transparency, JPEG will not work. It'll have to be PNG. By right-clicking on the layer and then choosing Quick Export as PNG. And I'm going to save this inside my site files folder. It's taken the name of the layer. Notice I didn't even have to type a name because I had named my layer. So if you haven't named your layers properly, while you save the PNG, you will have to set the name here. And then I go to my site files folder and save the PNG image. I will come back for checking the font sizes of the title and the menu later, but for now I'll build out the basic dimensions and color of my header in Dreamweaver, and then I'll drop the logo in. So going over to Dreamweaver, this is how my file stands now. Notice, because I saved my logo in the site files folder, my logo now shows up here under my site folder. But my HTML file itself just contains of a default blank header, section, and footer with some placeholder text. Now to start styling your page, you need to create a CSS file or a style sheet file and connect it to the HTML page. So to do this, I'm going to go over to the CSS designer on the right side. This is where I can create and add style sheets, and I can add specific styles for my page. Now, if I expand this right column of Dreamweaver, at some point the CSS designer splits into two columns, and this is a much more convenient interface for working with the CSS designer. First, I need to add a style sheet which will hold all the style definitions for my website. To do that, I go over to Sources, click on the plus, and say Create a new CSS file. So I'm going to create this file in the Site Files folder. So I click Browse, make sure I'm in my Site Files folder, and then I'll give it a name. I'm just going to call it something simple like style.css and then click Save. Under Add As, I'm going to keep it on Link. The advantage of linking a style sheet is that you can link the same style sheet to all your web pages. So for example, your home page, your portfolio page, your about and contact pages, and any other pages that you may have will all share the same style sheet. This is great because if you change your mind about the design, which does happen, then by changing one style definition in the style sheet, all your web pages that are linked to that style sheet will get updated. So if I change the background color of my header or the font size of my menu, just changing it once in the style sheet will affect the entire website. And then I go ahead and click on OK. Now two things happened. Even though the look and feel of the page has not changed, if I go down to my code, Dreamweaver has added a link tag with style.css in there. And the other thing that happened is up here under index.html, I have two tabs now, one for the source code or the HTML code and one for editing the style sheet. If I click here, under the code section, I will see the beginnings of my style sheet. So I'm going to go back to source code for now. Now before I can actually define properties for my header, there needs to be a mention of the header in the style sheet. Every style sheet contains style rules. A rule is made up of two things: a selector, which identifies which element of your page this rule applies to. Our first rule is going to be for our header. So I need to add a selector for the header, and then the second part of the rule will be a set of properties. So all of this will become clear as we go along. So here's what I'm doing. I'm just clicking on my header. I've already created my style sheet. So in my CSS designer, I go down to selectors and click on plus for add selector. Now because I have clicked on my header before coming here, Dreamweaver is trying to automatically create a selector for it. And it says the selector is body header, which means the header that is contained inside the page body. You remember the body tag, which is one of the most basic tags on any HTML page. So this is the header which is contained inside the body. So a selector is sort of like an address to find that particular element that you're trying to style. Saying body header to identify my header would be like saying Hawaii, Honolulu. So it's referring to the city of Honolulu inside the state of Hawaii. But there is only one Honolulu. We don't need to specify Hawaii. If you just say Honolulu, people know where it is. Same thing, since I have only one header on my page, I don't really need to specify that I'm talking about the header inside the page body. Where else would it be, right? So I can actually delete the word body, leave the word header, and my selector would still refer to my actual header. There is no difference in this case. Now if you have more than one element that shares the same name, then yes, you need the selector to be very specific. But since I have only one header on my page, just saying header is a good enough selector. Now I'm ready to add properties to my header. I'm going to start with the width, the height, and the background color. So I go over to the right side under the properties section. To see the full list of properties that I can add in Dreamweaver, I need to uncheck this checkbox that says Show Set, because this only shows the properties that I have set so far, which is none. That's why I'm not seeing any properties here. So I uncheck this box, and all of my CSS properties that are available to me appear here. They're organized into sections for layout, text, borders, backgrounds, and more, where I can add custom properties. I'm going to come back to layout, which is where I'll find width and height. Now since my header is full width no matter how wide the browser window gets. The way of translating that into CSS is to say the width of my header is 100%. So I'm going to click where it says auto, choose %, and then type 100. So it's 100%. Notice on the left side that didn't change anything because by default, when you create a new element like header, Dreamweaver already assumes that it is full width. So let's go on to the height. I'm going to just double click in here, or I can just click and choose my unit first, click and choose pixels, and then type 200. So as soon as I type 200 pixels, notice my header got taller. So this is the actual height of 200 pixels that my header will have. Next, I'm going to bring in the background color. So I need to go to Photoshop to look up the background color that I'm using. So I come in here, choose this color with the eyedropper, and then I look it up, and that's my color. Select it so it turns blue, right click and copy this hex code, which is a code that is web friendly. Then I go over to Dreamweaver, go to my background, and here where it says background color, undefined, I can double click on undefined and paste what I had. Now I'm going to hit enter, and you notice nothing happened. Let me show you why. Back in Photoshop, you see there is a pound sign, a hash sign in front of the color, which is not part of the color when I selected it. But that actually is what Dreamweaver expects. I need to add the pound sign here. Now when I hit enter, it understands that this is the hex code for this yellow, and then it applies that yellow color to my header. So one property at a time, I'm getting closer to the finished look of my header. My next step is to bring in my logo image. Now I had already saved my logo out as a PNG, so I'm going to place that inside here. Currently my header contains the placeholder text. Content for new header tag goes here. I'm going to remove this text and paste in my logo. So in live view, it's not as easy to edit the text and the elements like the header. Live view is more for our preview to see what it'll look like in the browser. To be able to edit this easily, I'm going to go up here to where I see code, split, and live. I'll still have the split view, but on the top, instead of live, I'll switch to design view. Design view doesn't exactly look like what it's going to look like in the browser, but it's an approximation and it still leaves me a lot of interface for editing my content. So now I'm inside design view and I'm ready to place my logo image. Before I do so, I would like to create an invisible box inside my header that is exactly 1,000 pixels wide and it holds all of my content. I'm going to call this my container. So to create an element like a container in HTML that can hold all kinds of content, including images, text, and stuff, we insert what is called a div. A div is short for page division. It's just a block of content that can have anything in it. In this case, I'm going to create a div, call it container, and set its width to 1,000 pixels, and then tell it to be centered within my header. My header itself is full width, so it'll stretch as long as the browser window goes, but I always want my container to be centered inside it. So to add my container div, I can remove this text first, and then I go up to Insert, Div. It's asking me where do I want to insert, and I say at insertion point. I can give this div a name here. Now there's two kinds of names. One is ID, which is a unique name that only that div can hold, and the other is a class. With a class, more than one div on the page can share the same name. Now in my case, my header will have a container which is 1000 pixels wide. My section will have a container which is 1000 pixels wide, and my footer will have a container which is 1000 pixels wide. So I will have three divs on this home page that share the same property of 1000 pixel width and center alignment within the width of the page. So what do you think I will do here? I will create a class called container. So all three divs, when I insert them, one in the header, one in the section, one in the footer, will be able to share the same name and the same properties. And then I can also create a new CSS rule for the class of container right now. Okay, now because it's a class, Dreamweaver knows what to do with a class, which is dot followed by the class name. Just like we had the hash symbol for a color, there are different symbols for different kinds of things within HTML and CSS. We just need to know a few of them. Every class in CSS is defined by a dot or a period in front of it. So I'm going to define this new style rule, and I'm going to define it in style.css so that all of my web pages can use it. So here's to recap what I'm doing. I'm creating a new CSS rule for a class called container inside style.css so it can be shared among different pages of my website. And then I click OK. Now Dreamweaver is already asking me to define what are the properties of container. I can come back and do this later. So I'm just going to click OK now. At this point, I just want to insert the div and I can tweak its properties later. So notice what happened. First, Dreamweaver added a div, that's this box, and put some placeholder content in it. Content for class container goes here. You can also see that same in the code section. The other thing that Dreamweaver did was it added a selector called .container. This is the selector for the new container class, and now I'm ready to add its styles. So I click on container under selectors. I know that the width of my container will be 1000 pixels, and my container will be centered inside my page, whether it's inside my header, my section, or my footer. The container will always be centered. How do I define that an element is centered? This is important, so pay attention because we're going to use this often. To define that something is centered is actually done through this property called margin. Margin is another way of saying what is the space around this element. When something is centered, it has equal space on the left and on the right. Makes sense, right? That's how it's centered. So no matter what the width of my browser window, if I have an element with equal space on the left side and the right side, it'll automatically be centered. So to center my container, which is of 1000 pixels width, I come down to margin and set my left margin to auto and my right margin to auto. As soon as I do this, Dreamweaver knows it is centered. So with this done, I'm going to save the page because I've added enough properties and I haven't saved the page yet. So because I have an HTML and a CSS file to save, I'm going to go to File and click on Save All instead of just Save. So I click on Save All, which saves both the HTML and the CSS file. So now I have my container and I'm ready to place my logo inside it. So I'm going to click inside my container. I'm in Design View, so it's easy to edit. I'll just clear out all of this placeholder content. Notice the container shrank, but I can still see like a blinking cursor over there, so I haven't lost it. And I go up to Insert, Image, choose my logo, and click Open, and there it is. So now I've inserted my PNG image inside the container, which is inside the header. I'm going to save my files again. And at this point, I want to just preview what my file will look like in the browser. So this is what my file looks like, my home page looks like right now in Safari. Notice my header stretches across the whole width except for this white margin all around, which I'm going to fix next. But my logo is sort of contained inside an invisible box. And notice as I change my browser width, it kind of keeps a certain distance. That's because my container is 1000 pixels and the margin on the right and the margin on the left are automatically adjusting to keep it centered. One way I can show you this is if I temporarily give a different background color to my container, just to show you. So I'm going to click on Container, go to Background, and change my background color to something obvious, like this. I'll save all, and then I'll go to my browser and reload the page. So as you can see, this is my container. As I resize the browser window, the width of the container is fixed and it stays centered on the page. That's what you get with the left margin and right margin set to auto and a fixed width set for the element. This is what it means. So I'm going to find out where this is coming from and then fix it. I'm going to remove this background image, and that'll be it for this video, and I'll continue editing the header in the next video. So to find out where these margins are coming from, they're actually coming from the page body. The page body, as I mentioned earlier, contains all the visible content of the page. Now by default, a browser will add some margin around the page body. So we have to tell the style sheet that we don't want any margin around our page body. How do we do this? First, we need to add a selector for body. So I come into my code, I click on the body tag. This is one way to add a selector. By using the code view, click on the tag that you want to add a selector for, and then go up to the CSS designer, go to selectors, and click plus. So this time Dreamweaver got that I want to create a selector for that page body, which is correct. I hit enter, and now I'll set some properties for my page body. Under layout, which is where I find margin, I'm going to click on this link, this chain link inside the margin box. When I do this, I only need to change one value and all four will change. Basically, this chain connects all four values, so I only need to say one and all will be affected. So I'm going to click inside where it says 0 pixels and hit enter, and notice what happened. All of that white space around my header went away. I'm going to save all, go to my browser, refresh, and that's gone. And lastly, I'm going to remove that background color that I added to the container. To remove a CSS property, you go to the property and then mouse over it, and on the right side you see a trash can icon to delete the property. That got rid of the red color. Now I'm going to save all again, come out here to the browser, refresh, and the color is gone, my container is still aligned, and the extra white space around my page body is gone. So in the next video, I will show you how to align the logo down at the bottom of the header, and then we'll proceed to add the page title in.